Good evening, and welcome to Restored Lore, your home for old, odd, and obscure stories. Tonight it is springtime, and nature is full of warmth and rebirth, so let's have a story that's a bit light and playful. That story is The Queen of the Golden Mines by Seumas MacManus. This story comes from MacManus's collection In Chimney Corners, Merry Tales of Irish Folklore, first published in 1899. Now, brace yourself for my silly Irish accent, and let's begin. Once on a time there was a king of Ireland, and he had 3 sons, Teddy, Billy, and Jack. Teddy and Billy was the 2 eldest, and they were brave, able boys. But Jack was the youngest, a gauchy, downy sort of lad that was good for nothing, only feeding fowls and doing odd turns about the house. When they grew up to be men, Teddy and Billy one day said they'd go away and travel and see the world, for they'd only be good-for-nothing omadons if they'd stay here all their lives. Their father said that was good, and so off both of them started. And that night, when they halted from their travelling, who does they see coming up after them but Jack, for it seems he commenced to think long when he found them gone, and he was that lonesome that he couldn't stay behind them. And there he was, dressed in his old tattered clothes, a spectacle for the world and a disgrace to them, for, of course, they were done off with the best of everything, real gentlemen, as becomed their father's sons. They said to themselves they'd be long sorry to let that picture with them, for he was a picture, and no doubt of it, to be an upcast to them wherever they'd go. So, before they started in again next morning, they tied Jack to a millstone and left him there. That night again, when they went to stop from their travelling, what would he have of it but there was me brave Jack once more, not 100 parches behind them, and he dragging the millstone after him. Teddy and Billy said this was too bad entirely, and next day, before they started again, they tied another millstone to him, and they said, "Well, you'll not get away from here in a hurry anyhow, boy." So on they went again on their journey, laughing and cracking jokes and telling passages to pass the time. But that night again, when they went to stop from their journey, lo and behold ya, who does they see coming tearing after them but my poor Jack once more, with the 2 millstones dragging behind him. Then they were in a quandary entirely, and they began to consider what was best to do with him, for they saw there was no holding or tying of him or keeping him back at all, for if they were to tie him to a mountain in the morning, he'd be after them with the mountain rattling at his heels again night. So they come to the conclusion it was best to take Jack with them and pretend him to be their hired boy and not their brother at all. Of course, me poor Jack, that was always agreeable, was only too ready to go on these terms, and on the 3 of them went afore them, till at length they reached the King of England's castle. When the King of England heard Teddy and Billy was the King of Ireland's 2 sons, he gave them céad mille fáilte, was pleased and proud to see them, ordered them to be made much of, then opened his hall door, and asked the nobility and the gentry of the whole countryside to a big dinner and a ball that he gave in their honour. But what do you have of it but in the middle of the ball doesn't Teddy have a fall-out with the King of England's son, and struck him, and then that was the play. The hubbub and the hurroosh got up, and the king ordered the ball to be stopped and had Teddy taken prisoner, and Billy and Jack ordered away out of the kingdom. Billy and Jack went away, vexed in their hearts at leaving Teddy in jail, and they travelled away till they come to France and the King of France's castle. Here, when the King of France heard that Billy, the King of Ireland's son, had come to see him, he went out and welcomed him, and asked in himself and Jack to come in and make a visit with him. And, like the King of England, he thought he couldn't make too much of the King of Ireland's sons, and threw open his hall door, and asked in the whole nobility and clergy and gentry of all the countryside into a great dinner and ball given in Billy's honour. But lo and behold ya, doesn't it turn up at this ball too that Billy had a squabble with the King of France's son, and struck him, and the ball was stopped by the king's orders, and the people sent home, and Billy taken prisoner, and there was poor Jack now left all alone. The King of France, taking pity on Jack, employed him as a boy, and Jack was getting along very well at court, and the king and him used to have very great yarns together entirely. At length a great war broke out betwixt France and Germany, and the King of France was in great trouble, for the Germans were slaughtering and conquering all before them. Says Jack, says he, to the king one day, I wish I had only half a regiment of your men, and you'd see what I would do. Instead of this, the king gave him a whole army, and in less nor 3 days there wasn't a German alive in the whole kingdom of France. It was the king that was the thankful man to Jack for this good action, and said he never could forget it to him. After that, Jack got into great favour at court, and used to have long chats with the queen herself. But Jack soon found that he never could come into the queen's presence that he didn't put her in tears. He asked her one day what was the meaning of this, and she told him it was because she never looked on him that he didn't put her in mind of her infant son that had, 12 months before, been carried away by the Queen of the Golden Mines, and who she had never heard tale or tidings of from that day to this. Well, be this and be that, says Jack, says he, but I'm not the man to leave you in your trouble if I can help it, and be this and be that over again, says he, but I won't sleep 2 nights in the one bed, or eat 2 meals meat at the one house, till I found out the Queen of the Golden Mines' castle, and fetch back your infant son to you, else I'll not come back living. Ah, says the Queen, that would never do. And says the king, that would never do at all. They pointed out and showed to him how 100 great knights had gone on the same errand before him, and not one of them had ever come back living, and there was no use in him throwing away his life, for they couldn't afford to lose him. But 'twas all no use. Jack was bound on going, and go he would. So the very next morning he was up at cock-crow, and after leaving goodbye with the whole of them, and leaving the king and queen in tears, he started on his journey. And he travelled away afore him, inquiring his way to the castle of the Queen of the Golden Mines, and he travelled and tramped for many a weary day, and many a weary week, and for many a weary month, till at last, when it was drawn on 12 months from the day he left the castle of the King of France, one day, towards evening, he was travelling through a thick wood, when he fell in with an old man, resting, with a great bundle of sticks by his side, and "Me poor old man," says Jack, says he, "that's a mighty great load entirely for a poor man of your years to be carrying. Sure, if you'll allow me, I'll just take him with me for you, as far as you're going." "Blessings on you," says the old man. "And an old man's blessing atop of that, and thank ye." "No, but thank ye yourself for your good wishes," says Jack, says he, throwing the bundle of sticks on his shoulder and marching on by the old man's side. And they travelled away through the wood till they come at last to the old man's cabin. And the old man asked Jack to come in and put up with him for the night, and such poor accommodation as he had, Jack was heartily welcome to them. Jack thanked him, and went in and put up the night with him, and in the morning Jack told the old man the errand he was on, and asked if he'd direct him on his way to the Queen of the Golden Mines' castle. Then the old man took out Jack and showed him a copper castle glancing in the sun on a hill opposite, and told him that was his journey's end. "But, me poor man," says he, "I would strongly advise you not to go next nor near it. 100 knights went there afore you on the self-same errand, and their heads are now stuck on 100 spears right afore the castle, for there's a fiery dragon guards it, and makes short work of the best of 'em." But seeing Jack wasn't to be persuaded off his enterprise nohow, he took him in and gave him a sword that carried 10 men's strength in it along with that of the man that wielded it. And he told Jack, if he were alive again night, and not killed by the dragon, to come back to his cabin. Jack thanked him for the sword, and promised this, and then set out for the castle. But, lo and behold ye, no sooner did Jack come near the castle than a terrible great monster of a dragon entirely, the wildest ever Jack seen or heard tell of, come out of the castle, and he opened his mouth as wide as the world from one side to the other, and let out a roar that started the old grey eagle on top of Kirkpatrick Mountain at home in Ireland. Poor Jack trembled from head to foot, and small wonder he did, but Not a bit daunted, he went on to meet the dragon, and no sooner were they met than he to it and the dragon to it, and they fought and strove long and hard, the wildest fight by far that poor Jack had ever entered into. And they fought that way from early morning till the sun went down, at one time Jack seeming to be getting the better of the dragon, and the next minute the dragon getting the better of Jack. And when the sun went down they called a truce of peace till the next day, and Jack dragged himself back to the cabin in small hopes of being able to meet the dragon more, for he was covered over with wounds from head to foot. But when he got to the cabin, the old man welcomed him back alive, and took down a little bottle of ointment and rubbed it over Jack, and no sooner did he rub it over him than Jack's wounds were all healed as well as ever again. And Jack went out a new man the next morning to give the dragon another try for it this day. And just as on the day afore, the fiery dragon come down the hill meeting poor Jack, and the dragon opened his mouth as wide as the world, and gave a roar that shook the nails on the toes of the great grey eagle on top of Croagh Mountain at home in Ireland. And then he fell on Jack, and Jack fell on him, and the dragon to it, and Jack to it, and the dragon gave Jack his fill, and Jack gave the dragon his fill, and if they fought hard the day afore, they fought double as hard this day, and the dragon put very sore on Jack entirely till the sun went down. Then again they agreed on a truce of peace till the next morning, and Jack dragged himself back as best as he could to the cabin again, all covered over with cuts and bruises, and streaming down with blood. And when he came there, the old man took down a little bottle of ointment and rubbed Jack over with it, and he was healed as well as ever again. Next morning, Jack was up quite fresh and ready for another day's battling, and the old man told Jack that, win or lose, this day was like to end the battle. And he said that if Jack happened, as God sent, to come off victorious, he was to go into the castle, and there he would find a great number of beautiful virgins running about in great confusion to prevent Jack from discovering their mistress, the Queen of the Golden Mines, and every one of them asking, "Is it me you want? Is it me you want?" But he told Jack he was to heed none of them, but press through room after room till he come to the 6th room, and there he would find the Queen herself asleep, with the little child by her side. So Jack went meeting the dragon this 3rd day again, and the dragon come meeting Jack. And he opened his mouth as wide as the world, and let out a roar that rattled the eyes in the sockets of the great grey eagle on top of Croagh Mountain at home in Ireland, and then fell on Jack, and Jack fell on him, and he to it, and Jack to it, and both of them to it. And if the fight was wild and terrible the first 2 days, it was 10 times wilder and terribler this day. And harder it was getting the more they warmed to the work, and one time it was Jack was getting the better of the dragon, and the next time it was the dragon getting the better of poor Jack, and at last coming on towards night, the dragon was putting very hard on Jack entirely, and it was very near being all over with him, when he stepped back, and gathering all his strength, mounted into the air with one spring, and come down atop the dragon's head, and struck his sword into his heart, leaving him over dead. Then Jack went into the castle, and no sooner did he go in than there was lots of the most beautiful virgins running in great commotion and asking Jack, "Is it me you want? Is it me you want?" But Jack never heeded them till he come into the 6th room, where he saw the beautiful Queen of the Golden Mines asleep, with the Queen of France's child asleep beside her. Jack bent over and gave her one kiss, for she was a lovely picture. Then he took up the child in his arms, and, picking up a beautiful garter all glancing with diamonds that was lying by the Queen's bedside, and, taking with him a loaf of bread that could never be eaten out, a bottle of wine that could never be drunk out, and a purse that could never be emptied, he started away. He stopped that night with the old man, who took down his bottle of ointment and healed up all the wounds Jack got that day. In the morning Jack started for France, leaving with the old man to keep, till the Queen of the Golden Mines would call for it, the purse that never could be emptied. When Jack reached France and presented back to the Queen her darling child, that was the rejoicement and the joy. There was a great feast given, and at the feast Jack said he had a little wonder he fetched with him, and that he'd like to show. And he produced his bottle, and sent it round the princes and nobility and gentry that were all assembled at the feast, and asked them all to drink the Queen's health out of it. This they all did, and lo and behold ya, when they had finished, the bottle was still as full as when they had commenced, and they all said that bate all they ever knew or heard tell of. And the king said it beat all ever he knew or heard tell of too, and that the same bottle would be mighty great service to him to keep his troops in drink when he'd go to war, and he asked Jack on what terms he'd part with it. Jack said he couldn't part with it entirely, as it wasn't his own, but if the king released his brother, he'd leave the bottle with him till such times as the Queen of the Golden Mines might call for it. The Queen agreed to this. Jack's brother was released, and himself and Jack started off for England. When they were come there, the King of England gave a great feast in their honour too, and at this feast Jack said he'd like to show them a little wonder he fetched with him, and he produced the loaf, and asked the king to divide all round. And the king cut off the loaf and divided all round over all the princes and nobility and gentry that was there, and when he had finished they were all lost in wonderment, for the loaf was still as big as when the king commenced to cut. The king said that would be the grand loaf for feeding his troops whenever he went to war, and asked Jack what would he take to part with it. Jack said the loaf wasn't his to part with, but if the king released his brother out of prison, he'd give him the loaf till such times as the Queen of the Golden Mines might call for it. The king agreed to this, and released Jack's other brother, and then the three of them started for home together. And when they were come near home, the two older brothers agreed that Jack, when he'd tell his story, would disgrace them, and they'd put him to death. But Jack agreed that if they'd let him live, he would go away and push his fortune and never go back near home. They let him live on these conditions, and they pushed on home, where they were received with great welcomes and told mortal great things entirely of all the great things they done while they were away. Jack come to the castle in disguise and got hired as a boy and lived there. The Queen of the Golden Mines, when she woke up and learned of the young gentleman that had killed the dragon and carried off the child and the other things and kissed her, said he must be a fine fellow entirely, and she would never marry another man if she couldn't find him out. She got no rest till she started, herself and her virgins, and away to find out Jack. She first come to the old man, where she got her purse, and he directed her to the King of France. When she come to the court of the King of France, she got her bottle, and he said Jack went from there to go see the King of England. From the King of England she got her loaf, and he directed her to Ireland, telling her that Jack was no other than the King of Ireland's son. She lost no time then reaching the court of the King of Ireland, where she demanded his son who had killed the fiery dragon. The king sent out his eldest son, and he said that it was him that had killed the fiery dragon, and she asked him for tokens, but he could give none, so she said he wasn't the man she wanted. Then the king's second son come out and said it was him killed the fiery dragon, but he couldn't show her no tokens either, so he wouldn't do. Then the king said he had no other son, but a good-for-nothing drudge who went away somewhere and never come back, but that wasn't him anyhow, for he couldn't kill a cockroach. She said she'd have to see him and converse with him, or otherwise she wouldn't go away till she'd pull down his castle. Then the whole house was upside down, and they didn't know what to do. And Jack, who was doing something about the yards, asked what it was all about, and they told him, and he asked to have a minute's conversing with her. They all laughed at him, and one gave him a knock, and another gave him a push, and another gave him a kick. And Jack never minded them one bit, but went out and said it was him that killed the fiery dragon. They all set up another big roar of a laugh at this. Then the queen asked him to show his tokens, and Jack fetched from his pocket the beautiful garter, all shining with jewels, and held it up, and the queen came and threw her arms about Jack's neck and kissed him, and said he was the brave man she'd marry and no other. And my brave Jack, to the astonishment of them all, confessed who he was, and got married to her, and was, ever after, the King of the Golden Mines. What an absolutely charming story. It is, of course, that same old formula with the three princes and the disfavored youngest prince and the journey away from home and all that, but Jack is still a very distinctive and delightful character. He manages to be polite and respectful of everyone throughout the whole story, even of the Queen of the Golden Mines from the very beginning, even though she's the bad guy, and he never holds a grudge when he's been treated badly. We never find out why the Queen of the Golden Mines took up kidnapping. Really, this queen is quite the mysterious figure. She obviously has gold mines somewhere, and she has a fiery dragon and a desire to kidnap royal babies. She lives in a big copper castle full of loyal virgins. That whole scene feels a little bit Monty Python and the Holy Grail to me, right? She apparently sleeps very soundly. For all that she's like the title of the story, we don't get a lot of backstory of her character. Jack, meanwhile, is able to drag millstones and defeat armies and slay dragons, but his family inexplicably insists that he is a good-for-nothing Amadan. He should have just stayed in France where they appreciated him so much. By the way, I think the brief reference to the war between France and Germany was probably the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, although Germany did win that war. That war would have happened when Seumas MacManus was just a young child. So, Seumas MacManus is really an interesting character. He was born in County Donegal and he became a teacher. Now, for some reason, in the 1890s, when he was in his 20s, he began contributing short stories of Irish folklore and fairy tales to US magazines and publications. And perhaps primed by the work of Yeats and Douglas Hyde and others, American readers absolutely loved these stories and they became incredibly popular, especially among a growing sort of middle class of Irish Americans. He toured the US telling his stories, and at some point he moved to New York where all the big publishing houses were, and the man was putting out 2 or 3 story collections a year for a while. Now, naturally, when something is too popular, it becomes mainstream, and a lot of people criticized his work for not having a lot of artistic merit. Many critics pointed out that some of these folk tales are the same old stories they'd grown up with, but kind of written in brogue with some Irish characters. For those reasons, and also because he was always more well-known and popular in the US than in Ireland, his work hasn't received a lot of contemporary analysis. Some people love him for having brought Irish oral storytelling traditions to the US, calling him a shronshi, a traditional storyteller and a holder of the old lore, while some people think that he was pandering to less informed American audiences and playing a bit into Irish stereotypes. His Wikipedia page has this amazing quote from him, which is, I think, so appropriate for this channel. Quote, "These tales were made not for reading, but for telling. They were made and told for the passing of long nights, for the shortening of weary journeys, for entertaining of traveller guests, for brightening of cabin hearths. Be not content with reading them, and be grateful to the shronshis who passed these tales to me for you." If you listen all the way to the end of the video, you get to hear me make a little confession. Tonight's confession is that I am thinking a lot lately about the algorithms that are shaping our lives and our thoughts, and AI and bots and YouTube, both as a creator and as an audience member, and what type of future we might be creating. But those thoughts are not just dark, they're also vague. I don't have anything conclusive to say, they're just dwelling in my mind. And I don't want to indulge in too much darkness here on this channel. I want this project to be fun and interesting for me and for you. And the weather has turned warm and there are little buds on the trees, and I personally feel so alert and interested, blinking around at everything like a groundhog coming out of my burrow, eager to see and smell and taste and try and do, and I want to celebrate these feelings of hope and newness while they last. I have a cute little terrace, and I'm messing with my plants, and I'm setting up my furniture, and I can't wait for it to be warm enough to have my morning coffee out there. Having morning coffee on the terrace was one of the first mental images that caught my imagination when looking at this house, although, to be totally honest, I imagine having coffee in the sun on the terrace more often than I actually do it. There always seems to be something more important to do in the morning than sip coffee and listen to birds sing and watch the plants grow. That has to change this year. On a quick side note, I recently cashed out my Buy Me a Coffee account. Thank you so much to everybody who's tossed a few dollars my way. After fees and conversion and everything, it was only 26 euros, but I wanted to make sure that everything was set up correctly, which it really is. And then, according to my mission, I went to donate 10% to archive.org, which is especially important right now because every 4 years before an incoming administration, they archive and store all of the websites of the US federal government, which is a huge undertaking. So I went to make the donation, and I realized that, of course, they want the money in dollars, and I have to convert it back. And also, of course, I'm going to pay the 50 some cents or whatever the processing fee is. So I go over to my Wise account to transfer a few dollars over and see that I have just a couple bucks in there from something else. So blah, 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 blah. I ended up donating $4.08 to archive.org from your contributions to the channel. And yes, it's a very trivial amount, especially in the face of everything. But doing something small is still better than doing nothing at all. And I'm really grateful to the handful of you who made that possible. If you like stories for the passing of long nights and the shortening of weary journeys, for the entertaining of guests and the brightening of the hearth, you are in the right place. Subscribe to the channel and choose notifications so you never miss a story. Please also drop a like on this video and leave a comment below to let me know what you think. Finally, if you want to support me even further, please use the link in the description below to buy me a coffee. Thank you so, so much, and I will see you in a few days.